Welcome, everyone. My name is Libby Deniston, and I want to thank you for joining us for Lifetime's Adoption webinar today. We've put together a special topic. It's a very popular topic for anyone who's hoping to adopt. We're going to talk all about home studies. We sort of tentatively called this webinar Behind the Scenes of Your Adoption Home Study because really it's going a little bit beyond the basics of what is a home study and what do you need to do for your home study, but to actually talk about what your home study provider is doing with all of the information, all the documents, all the appointments you're keeping, all of the classes you're taking, um, the interviews that you're having with your social worker, that we're really going to talk about um, what goes into that home study is not just, you know, checking things off and getting a few sort of stock documents, but the importance and why. And then really what I want to impress too is kind of how there's this partnership going on between you and your home study provider, that they are counting on you as much as you're counting on them, and the importance of getting things in a timely manner and in the order in which they need them, and having them up, having everything up to date so that everything moves smoothly when your adoption starts coming together and you're getting ready to bring baby home. So I want to thank all of you for taking time to be here today. And we do want to encourage your questions. So if you have a question or comment as we discuss our topic today, definitely find the questions box and let us know what's on your mind. And then we have a team of coordinators behind the scenes here that have joined our webinar, so you may see Kim, Patty, or Natalie chiming in by typing with you. So if you see their name pop up, don't be surprised. We're all here as a big team at Lifetime to help you get every necessary element in place and every answer, because as we like to say, there's no such thing as being overeducated when it comes to adopting. So my guest today is actually a big part of Lifetime's team. Linda Rotz is joining us, and she has years and years of experience helping people adopt. She's worked in all different types of adoptions before, and now at Lifetime, part of her role is actually helping some adoptive parents complete their home studies. So Linda, thanks for being here today.
Hi, well, thank you for having me. How is everybody?
Yeah, we don't get to hear from you on webinars very often, so this is nice to get somebody from our Florida office too, which is fun. Now, you and I had a conversation pretty recently, and then it kind of just continued, but what I hear on a lot of webinars are a lot of questions about home study, and that's from people who are just starting to think about adoption, all the way up to people who are already waiting with us and actively pursuing an adoption. And so that question of all those details about a home study, that's always on adoptive parents' minds. And so I was excited to bring you on today because some of the things you were telling me, I thought, gosh, if they could only know this from the home study provider's perspective, maybe they would see their efforts a little differently or see their role in that home study adoptive parent partnership a little more clearly. So I'm glad that you're here today. Can you just start us off? Maybe there's some joining us today. We have a very mixed audience, which is great because you can all kind of learn from each other and the different stages that you're in. But can you just kind of nutshell, let's start off with just getting out of the way that basic of what is a home study when it comes to domestic adoption?
Well, domestic or international adoption, it is a requirement to have an independent investigation of your ability to parent. So it's really a social studies report that investigates the prospective adoptive families' social history, how they grew up, what their family dynamic is now, along with criminal background checks, medical information, financial information, but all of the information that is gathered is really strictly to tell a judge and convince a judge that you have the ability to parent a child, and it is up to that social worker who writes the home study to make that assessment.
Mm-hmm. Uh, and I've never heard it put quite that way. I love that you said that this report really does come down to telling that judge, because that is what I hear from adoptive parents once they bring their babies home, is that they never realized how important their home study was until they were trying to add that specific baby to their family. And so I love that you kind of just skipped right to that point, because that is where your home study is going to end up. And I hope today we can talk about even just crossing state lines, that it comes into play then too.
Oh, sure.
I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, when you think about a judge, and the fact that a judge has probably, a half an hour to kind of read the information that was provided to him or her and make an assessment to say yes to that adoption, it is so important that the information that is provided to that judge is accurate and precise, and because the judge is actually taking your word for it, that all of the information is there. And so the home study writer is not only writing the home study, but validating the information that is provided to the home study writer by the family.
And I can't emphasize enough to all of you the importance of working with a home study professional that does have that experience, that they're not just winging it or, kind of reading Google on how to do a home study, that you're really working with someone that's not going to add hurdles or complications to you trying to complete your adoption. So Linda, what would you tell people as far as if they are looking for the right home study help? I mean, I know that you are only familiar with Florida, but certainly you must have some tips for people even out of the area on, what kind of things are you going to want to look for when you're picking the right help for your home study?
Well, if at all possible, and sometimes it is not possible because some states don't require it, but it is best to find a home study writer that is connected with a licensed agency. And the reason for that is because they can provide other services that you may need, such as a state may require that you have a certain amount of training or certain types of training hours to attach to your home study. A home study agency can also do post-placement supervision, which is required after a baby is placed in your home. So you want somebody that is connected with an agency and then is also a qualified professional that has the ability to make those assessments.
Mm-hmm. That's really good. And I know that when we're working one-on-one with families at Lifetime, that is a huge recommendation that we offer, just because it does make things go smoother. And it really, we were just talking recently about, sometimes it would surprise people who are very diligent in their adoption process to know that not everyone is as diligent, for lack of better words, is as detail-oriented, or even following guidelines and requirements to complete a home study while they are actively pursuing an adoption. And you mentioned something about the coming before the judge and everything being up to date. Can you talk about what that looks like? So we had a couple great questions come in about having a current home study, but what does it look like to you when you say everything's up to date? And we're going to bring up a checklist here in just a little bit as we talk about what's involved in the home study, but what is a judge looking at when they're thinking of a valid home study?
Okay, that's a good question. Most states require the home study to be renewed every year. So they're only good for a year. And there's a couple of states that actually have them a little bit longer, but for the most part, most states are 1 year. And included in that 1 year are some of the support documentation that a family would have to provide to include in the home study. And that would be an home application. Every state has their own statewide application to complete for a home study, and that needs to be signed and dated and can't be more than a year old. The financial information cannot be more than a year old. So your most recent tax return is very important. Physicals can't be more than a year old. So that's very important. School references, family references, non-relative references, all things have to be updated every single year. And if any of them are over a year old, that would expire the home study. And another one that's very, very important is your background clearances. In every state, you would be required to submit to an FBI check, and then a state check, and then a local check where you would have to go to your local police department and get information on local clearances. You also have to submit to a child abuse registry, which means that every person that applies to adopt has to submit to the registry to see if they're listed on an abuse registry. And the last one is a sexual abuse registry. So your name or an adoptive parent's name would be submitted to that registry to make sure they're not included on that registry as well. Those are also a year. Vaccinations are a year. So if any of that is over a year old, then your home study is not good. So it's really important that we keep those up to date.
And we usually talk about how updating a home study is a little simpler than doing the whole one from the start, which is also another good reason why all of you should keep dates and set reminders for when you need to get new things updated so you're not having to start over. But you mentioned, I was curious to know this, and I think a couple questions came up, but you mentioned the references. So, and I may bring up this checklist here in just a second. I just didn't want to overwhelm everyone because it's a big checklist. But you mentioned references. Now, do friends and family have to rewrite those reference letters to your home study provider every year, or do they just call again and verify? Because you actually told me something recently that I would love for you to even go into detail about just that element of the home study, which is cross-checking those references. Can you talk about the hours that go into even just following up with the people who contribute those reference letters?
I can't tell you how many hours it takes to complete a home study once all the information is intact and with the home study writer, because sometimes the process of actually getting all of the information is daunting. And then once everything is in one place, then the home study writer has to go through and validate everything that's written. So you have to call the doctor's offices and make sure they're a patient at that doctor's office. You have to call every single reference and, you know, make sure that what they're saying in writing is what they're saying verbally. And I'm telling you that because there have been times that I have gotten a written reference from relatives, and then when I called them, they kind of backtrack on what they're saying. Well, I had to put it in writing, so I didn't want them to see that, so that's what I put, but this is how I really feel. So, and some are, you know, overjoyed and elated and saying really good things, but I have had situations where it made me question, and so then you have to dig deeper and maybe ask for more references because, you know, maybe this person had a tip with somebody else. You just have to make sure that everything that you're putting in a home study is accurate. Employment references are another thing that you have to call on. Sometimes they won't tell you, you know, information as to like what type of employee that person is, but they certainly will confirm, you know, employment at that workplace. School references for children, you need to check on those. So when the checklist is placed up there, you'll see some of the information that is required in a home study, and if you really look at all of them, the home study writer is going to validate everything that's on there. So it does take quite a bit of time.
Which is why it makes sense when most home study providers, if you haven't yet started a home study or if maybe you've already gone through one, um, most home study providers in my experience will say, well, the home study, the timing of completing one often hinges on how quickly and accurately I receive the information. But then you're also hearing Linda describe all of the detailed work that goes in once all of that is submitted. So even if everything is, you know, given to you properly and it's all accurate, you're still cross-checking, verifying, making sure that everything's legitimate so that nothing comes back to stop an adoption later. So I appreciate you talking about that. We had a couple really good questions here that said, does a home study have to remain current or valid all the way through finalization? So let's say that they adopt and it takes a year to finalize. Are they going to need to renew their home study somewhere before that finalization comes?
No, that's a really good question, and the answer to that is it has to be valid through the date that the child is placed in your home, or the date when consents are signed by the birth mom. So once that occurs, and I've had it happen like the day before a home study expired and the consents were signed the day before, it's all good. So it is. It doesn't have to be current up to the date of adoption. It has to be current up to the date the birth mom signs consents and you take the child into your custody.
Okay. Well, I'm sure that puts a lot of people at ease too. Just forecasting down the road in case because sometimes it takes longer in different states or even different circumstances come into play and finalization may not happen quickly. And so I'm glad we could talk about that. Let's see, I want to make sure that we cover this. Now, I did bring up the checklist, and I put at the top of this that this is a sample home study checklist. So I don't want all of you to look at this and think it's a literal verbatim one. Your home study provider may have a similar checklist that's shorter or longer, or they may require things in a different order. However that may be, you need to make sure that you understand what your specific home study provider needs. But Linda, you mentioned adoptive home application, so essentially that's them applying to you as kind of the umbrella of who they are.
It's a statewide like short form application with basic necessary information that the state would require along with the date of the application, because again, that's only good for a year. So every state has that. The adoptive parent questionnaire, which is right underneath that. Now this is Florida's requirements, but most states have the same type of requirements. The questionnaire is the most tedious thing that you will have to complete because it has information about, you know, how you grew up and who your parents are and naming your siblings and if your siblings have children and do you have experience parenting. How did you meet as a couple? What do you like about each other most? What are your hobbies? You know, what are you looking for? You know, what are your preferences? So those questionnaires could be about 60 pages. So when you get that packet in the mail to do your home study, don't let it feel so daunting. Just take a little piece at a time and you'll get through it. If you follow a checklist and just, you know, one day at a time and just fill it out as best you can. But that will be the most daunting thing is your adoptive parent questionnaire, because that's the information that you're going to be feeding to your home study writer about who you are.
Mm-hmm. Now, are those things that come back in, for instance, in my experience, most states require 1 or 2 or 3 home visits from that home study provider. So do you go back over that questionnaire with them, or is that new information that you're uncovering when you're having a home visit?
Well, typically the way I do it, and every home study writer does it a little bit differently, but I like when I get the information and it's all complete, I go through everything before I go to the home visit, because that allows me to come up with more questions if I have them. For example, let's just say that we got backgrounds back from a particular family, and let's just say that the the adoptive father, the prospective adoptive father, had a misdemeanor charge when he was 18 years old. I would want more information about that, and so I would dig deeper during the visit and ask more questions. So a lot of times when you're reading the adoptive parent questionnaire, once you're reading through it and you're thinking about how you want to write the story about this family, you come up with questions that you want to ask. So those are the things that happen when you go to the home visit. The other thing that happens at the home visit is some of the education piece. Some states require that the home study provider ensure that they have talked to the family about certain things. For example, in Florida, we have to talk to the families about corporal punishment and get the family's opinion on corporal punishment, and that needs to be written in the home study. And there are some other things.
By that, you mean like spanking and discipline, how they're going to discipline the child, right?
Okay. Yeah, yes. So the state of Florida requires that a family not use corporal punishment as a form of discipline. And so a family in Florida has to actually agree to that. So the home study writer actually has to provide information about that and education about that, and then that has to be written in the home study.
Mm-hmm.
And
so
every state is different.
Right. Well, and I know even in California, now it's been a little while since this was confirmed, but I remember there were times too, some families believed in some form of corporal punishment as discipline, and some didn't. And there were different home study providers. Some of them approved families who did follow that method, and some of them would not approve families who did. So it may also come down to who will help you reach your goal. But I love that you brought in the educational piece about that too, because I imagine if there's someone who never thought of a different way, but they live in a state where they're not going to be able to adopt if they insist on disciplining with spanking or some kind of hitting or corporal punishment, that then the education comes into play. Okay, well, these are what we recommend, and you can take classes on these. There's parenting information about this to help them prepare so they can get approved to adopt.
Correct.
So when it comes to those home visits, is that something that also has to be updated when that home study, comes around for renewal?
Most
you
of the
have
time.
to go back and have, okay.
Yeah, in most cases. There may be a time or two that it is, nothing's changed. You have a relationship with that family, and, you've gone through everything and everything seems to be fine. But as a general rule, you should go back.
Yeah.
And sometimes, you go back several times. Depending upon the family, you may have to go back to their home several times before you can finish the home study, but that's okay. That's
part of it. I had written this down, and then I saw a question pop up, so I'm glad that it came up because it sort of supported what I already wanted to say. But there was a good question here that said, I'm really nervous about the home study. Should I be? And I know that a lot of times when Kim and I are doing just general Q&A webinars, we get a lot of questions from people who are worried about not passing a home study. So I'd like to kind of talk about, how often does it happen that a family is denied approval for a home study? But also the question I wrote down was, what if something concerning comes up after a home study is approved with a family? And I honestly, I have worked with families where maybe it was just a misdemeanor or even a misunderstanding, but somehow they had some kind of run-in with the law. Maybe they got pulled over on New Year's Eve and they were a little bit over the drinking limit. If something comes up, once you're already approved to adopt, what happens then? But let's start with number one, should families be nervous about their home study? I think that's a really great question. But also, deeper than that, what would you say to families who I mean, how often does it happen that you have to tell a family, I'm sorry, you can't be approved?
I've had it happen, and I've had to do it, but not very often.
Yeah.
I would say to most families, don't be nervous about the home study. A lot of families want everything to be, picture perfect when the home study writer comes to the house, and everybody wants to put on a facade about how perfect their family is. And in all reality, every family has something, and not every family is perfect. And I don't go into a home expecting, cookies smelling in the oven and, everything in its place, because that's not how real people live all the time. I prefer to go in, on a day, after work at like 5:30 on a Wednesday, midweek, when, you come in and, if you have children, the kids' shoes and toys are all over the place. And I just prefer to see how people are really living, because that's what we're trying to approve. So I don't want anybody to feel intimidated when I come out to do a home study, because I recognize the fact that, we're all living and nobody is picture perfect. So it's important to me to see the real deal, and not, the the perfect impression that everybody wants to make.
Right. I mean, that said, do you still have some recommendations for those people who, you know, do they have to have all the dishes out of the sink, or should they run a
No,
vacuum around the house before you come over?
I mean, you don't want to. Most people don't have dirty homes. There are some people that may have a messy home, but it's not dirty, and that's okay. Dishes in the sink, that's fine. I mean, that's real life. If I were to come there on a day that somebody wasn't expecting me, which I have done, many times, that's usually what I'll see, something different. What's really funny is that oftentimes when I go out to do a home study for a family that has not adopted yet before, and so, it is very typical for people to, want everything to look perfect when I get there. And so, and I notice that. But then when a baby is placed in their home and I go, to that first home visit after the baby's there, you can tell that, it's a little bit more normal. And then the second home visit I go, and yeah, there's toys everywhere and there's bottles in the sink, and, it's just really kind of funny how that evolves, because life happens and you get busier, and that's real life. And that's what I want to see.
I love that, and I think that's reassuring. And we had a great comment here that said, our home study writer told us that she was looking for safety issues, not how clean we keep our home or how organized our home is.
That's a very good statement.
I would love if you could explain some of the things on this checklist, like water addendum. I imagine you're talking about water on the property, such as ponds, pools, access to lake, etc. What if a family has a pool? What kind of safety things do you usually check off in that respect with that water addendum?
Well, so if you're adopting an infant, it is just important to educate a family on what is needed, for water safety. And but if you were adopting like a toddler, then as a home study writer, I'd be going in there making sure that you had locks on the top of your doors going outside with an alarm when the door opens. Or if you don't have a pool fence, which in Florida is required, but if in another state it may not be, but you might, the home study writer might require you to have some sort of sensor device in the pool so that if there's a splash, an alarm goes off. It's real important to have, locks high up and not within reach of like a toddler, because toddlers are really smart. I've seen toddlers. I just saw a video on Facebook yesterday where this little boy was climbing on his dog and opened up the refrigerator to get what he wanted out of the refrigerator, and he was like 1. So,
oh my goodness.
Yeah, toddlers are really smart. So also you want to make sure, and I'm just educating, so with babies it's different, but with, toddlers, as they get older, you're going to want to put, locks on, all the electric outlets, or, little plugs in there. You're going to want to put safety locks on the doors, cabinet doors, where you might keep cleaning supplies. You want to keep your medicines in a locked cabinet. There's another firearm safety document that needs to be signed, because if you have firearms, then there's certain things that are required about where you have to keep them and how you have to store them if you have children in the home. That's a Florida requirement. I'm not sure about other states, but there are
Well, and I
certain
know
ways that you
one of my
have to
favorite
store them.
examples related to firearms was they had a locked gun safe, but they actually kept it in the room that they planned on being the nursery once they adopted. And so as part of the follow-up visits, it was just, recommended to them, well, you need to move the gun safe out of the nursery. That's not an appropriate place to store your firearms. So that it wasn't that they got denied their home study approval. It was that they, again, were educated, okay, move this, because this will come back into play. So we had some great questions pop up that, let's see, where did it go here? It said, so, and it sounded like you were starting to answer that, so that's why I wanted to bring this up. But some of our audience wants to know, do they have to fully baby-proof their home to complete a home study?
Well, that's a really good question, and it really depends on the home study agency or writer's requirements. Here in Florida, it is not required to have your home child-proofed for a home study when there isn't even an infant there yet. But once the infant arrives, then, all of those recommendations should, the home study writer will be starting to look to make sure that, you're starting the process of making sure that there's safety devices put in place as the child starts to get older. So it really depends on the agency and what the requirement is. They may just, give you a list of things that are recommendations, or they may give you a list of things that you're required to do by a certain period of time. So it is a good question to ask your home study writer when they're there. What is it that you're going to require of me or us at the time, a baby is placed in the home?
Right. And I hope all of you, what you're hearing as Linda shares this, and what I love is that you're getting inside the mind of someone who writes a home study, so that you maybe, even if you've already had a home study done, the nerves can still be there of feeling so exposed. I've heard that from a lot of adoptive parents, like, we have to go through so much more to prove that we will be safe parents than parents who give birth biologically never have to prove these things. And so sometimes it can feel very vulnerable, very frustrating even, to feel like you're just being looked at with a fine-tooth comb and in the microscope, and having all these questions. But at the same time, it really is for your benefit, and that your home study provider, as you're hearing Linda's heart here, is to help you succeed and to be prepared. So I've even heard from people who maybe you're having secondary infertility, and so you already have a child in the home that you gave birth to, and they go through a home study, and I've heard parents say, I wish I had to do this the first time. This was really helpful. So you can actually enjoy this process. And as you're hearing, Linda's a very approachable, friendly person. So it's probably even a pleasure to have your home study writer come into your home and just visit with you. I mean, that's what I'm hearing from you, Linda, is that it's a visit. This isn't an examination of sense, that you're not coming
or
into the
an
home
interrogation.
right, standing over them, that you're all sitting comfortably on the furniture, maybe having a glass of lemonade or some tea or something. I mean, that it's conversational, that it's personal.
I have a little something to share. I hope I didn't interrupt you too bad. But
No,
I do
you're
have
fine.
something I want to share based on what you were talking about a few minutes ago about how it feels so intrusive. and the information is so personal that you have to share with a home study writer. Um, here's my perspective on it. So let's just say that you were in a position of having to find a new family for your own child, for your child, either a child that you adopted and loved or, a birth child. And what would you do? How would you evaluate who it is that you want to place such a precious thing into somebody else's home? You would probably do the same thing. You'd want to know about how they live. You'd want to know about, if there are health concerns, and are they able to parent, even if they have some health concerns, like, or, make sure that they have the, financial ability to take care of them. And what if the child, becomes sick and the family is not financially able to take care of an illness? I mean, there's just so many things to think about. So if you put that in perspective, like if it was your own child, what would you do? What lengths would you take to, find the proper home for your child? It makes it easier for you to understand why we have to go through this process.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Linda, because that's honestly what I hear when I work with potential birth mothers, is that a common question that women have when they're thinking about adoption for their baby is, how do I know the adoptive parents are safe? How do I know they are who they say they are? Because we all hear horror stories on the news or in fantasy / maybe based on reality movies of like horrible scenarios that happened in adoption history, that bring those fears to mind. But like you said, when this woman is thinking about trusting strangers essentially to raise her child, even though she's not in the position to offer that stability at the time or the life that she wants her child to have in that moment, it doesn't mean she's not thinking about the future and the long-term stability and safety of her child. She very much has that on her mind. So I have heard these women just exhale in relief when I talk briefly about what adoptive parents go through to get approved to adopt, that they very much appreciate it, that it's a comfort to them to know that you've put time into this and that there are other professionals involved that aren't just your friends and family saying, yeah, they're awesome people, but people who are experienced in adoption and in child welfare and directing them to the right resources. So I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think it really does bring that perspective around and help take the edge off of feeling like this is all about whether or not you'd be good parents, but it's also a huge element that builds trust with that child's birth mom as she's choosing you. So I hope that helps some people. Let's see, there were some great questions here off the checklist, and I want to make sure, because I wrote down some of the notes from our chat before. Let's see. There was a couple questions about vaccinations for children, but then also about the pet vaccinations. So can we talk about vaccines and how that comes into play? It
Yeah.
can be. Now, when it comes to pet vaccines, I'll just share personally, I have a dog. I live in a county, now this is so strange, I live in a county where her rabies vaccination is, they want it every year, but the vaccine itself is actually good for 2 or 3 years. And the neighboring county, which is only 10, 15 minutes away, only requires that it's updated every 2 years. So, for instance, under that kind of pet example, what is a home study provider looking for when it comes to our little furry friends in our home?
Well, it really needs to coordinate with the expiration date of the home study. So the pet vaccinations are annual as well. And okay, it really doesn't matter, what the requirement is of one county to another. It really needs to follow the way the home study is designed. So for pet vaccinations, it's important that it's annual. And another reason why it's important to show the pet vaccinations, it's, it's, it shows the home study writer and the judge and whomever is reading the home study that, this family takes care of, their pets. If this family didn't take care of their pets and didn't get them vaccinated and such, that would be a concern and a question, because if they don't do it for their pets, then, are they going to follow that kind of same
Life
methodology,
or
with their
pattern,
children?
yeah.
So that's why it's important, and for a couple of reasons. And not only, not only those two reasons, but also, the health of the pet is important. You don't want a pet that's sick being around, a little baby, biting a baby and maybe having, some sort of disease. So we really need to make sure that the pets are vaccinated and that, they're calm, cool, and collected. I've been in homes before where, I've had dogs just jumping all over me, and I'm a dog person. I love dogs. Trust me, at my house there's 4 most of the time, because 2 of my kids leave their dogs over at, Linda's dog sitting palace whenever they go out and do something. So a lot of times we have 4 dogs. But, you don't want a dog jumping all over a baby. So you want to think of things like making sure that you're training the dog to be gentle around children. And a lot of people who haven't been around children or, don't have the first baby, that's not something that you think about, because you don't see your dog is great with you, but then something strange comes into the home and they act very differently. Trust me, they get jealous, they get hives, they don't understand what's going on. So you have to take care of that too.
Mhm.
That was a
So
little
what if you
tangent.
add, no, I love that, because a lot of adoptive parents have pets, and honestly, um, many birth mothers love finding adoptive parents with pets, but it is important to know some of this information, because you, I mean, like I was just explaining, I'm used to vaccinating her for some every year, but some of them are every 2 years, so I would just need to make sure that I knew the requirements so that I didn't let anything lapse. But what if I add a dog to my life? There was a great question about that. So let's say you were already approved to adopt, and then I took in a puppy. Do you have to go back
Anytime
and
there,
update your home study again?
well, it depends on the writer, but anytime you have a change in your family dynamic, and that includes that, you need to let your home study writer know. For me, if you told me about that, just send me the pet vaccination. I'll stick it in the file. If I have to do an update, like right before, you know, a baby is placed in your home, I can just add a one-page thing and add it to your home study and send it to your attorney. But, some agencies might require that there be a home study update done. So that's a good question to ask your writer. If, what is their policy on if there's a change in the family dynamic during the time that during the 1-year home study period.
Mhm. Okay, great. So we're having lots of questions pop up about pets, that we might have to have some of those for a Q&A in the future, just because I don't want this to be all about pets and your home study, because they are just kind of a small aspect. But I really love your example of this is really modeling a pattern for a future as a parent. This isn't how awesome your dog is, but um, again, that your home study writer she's reasonable. I mean, there's nothing in anything you've said today, Linda, that would make me think someone is just going in looking for a reason to just shut somebody's adoption
Oh,
dreams down.
no. No, we're trying to partner with a family to um, tell, a, a story about this family's life and what kind of life they're going to provide for a child. And, income, it doesn't matter if you are very wealthy or if you're middle class, or even if if you are, have moderate salaries, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's the ability to parent and what you do with it, what you do with your finances and how you parent and what you're going to do in the future. So a lot of people have questions about finances too, and it really is just about, a lot of people are really, have a, a moderate income and live better than some people who have large incomes. So it's really, kind of what you do with your life, and that's what we look for.
Hmm. I love that. Now, I wanted to touch briefly because there are some of you in the audience who already have children, and so as you see on this checklist, your children will come into play with the home study. In fact, even submitting their birth certificates,
Yeah,
their pediatrician reports. But what if it's a family, and I know you can only speak to your experience in Florida because truly this is something that is varying state to state. It's kind of a hot debate right now, but I know in California there's a big debate about vaccinating children. And so some adoptive parents have run into, well, either I don't plan on vaccinating my children or my children are not vaccinated. So under that, we could probably do a whole webinar just on that. But you know, again, with the mindset of your goal is to help them adopt, what would you say to a family who says, Linda, we haven't vaccinated our children, we feel strongly against it, um, but they're trying to complete a home study?
um, okay, so that's a really touchy subject, and there are lots of schools of thought. So my first question would be to the family, well, I understand your position. What does your doctor think? Do you have a doctor that, agrees with that? Um, will you follow that doctor's protocol as far as, you know, seeing the child, the patient? Um, and if the answer is yes, then you can answer that question with honesty in the home study that, all you're following the recommendations of the pediatrician. Um, and there are a lot of families that just don't believe in vaccinations right now. So the best thing that we can do is just refer back to the pediatrician. If the pediatrician's okay with it, then you can write that in your home study, and that's how it goes. And just be wary and be careful about what the state requirements are for vaccinations. And you may have to follow those state requirements until the adoption occurs in court. Um, just because the state law says that children who are, not adopted yet may be required to have certain vaccinations because they're still in, even though they might be in your home, they could be considered to be in state custody until the adoption occurs, depending on the state. So just be aware of that, and it's not a negative thing. It's just, we just have to word it properly so that when a judge looks at it, the judge knows that it's been addressed and that there's an alternative plan in place on how to take care of that child. Does
Mm-hmm.
that make sense?
Yeah. I also want to just reinforce the importance of being honest with the people who are helping you adopt. So if you're concerned, it never hurts to ask, hey, what should we do about this? This is our situation or our circumstance or our history, whatever it may be, that all of you may have a slightly unique story or instance that would come into play as you're doing a home study, or that could come up in the future as an update approaches or something like that. So I think it's very important to just make sure to remind all of you that these people, again, are here to help and that you should be able to talk to them and find out what you need to do. Because Linda, that all sounds very reasonable. But there may be some people that would put off even completing that element of their home study just because they're worried, or expecting some kind of answer instead of just asking and finding out for sure what they need to do. Which actually, oh gosh, it just came to mind and it just left. Um, All right. Well, we'll move on to the other question that I saw. um, Briefly, I wanted to answer quickly. There was a question that said, are birth mothers able to see home studies? And um, sort of my nutshell answer to that, and Linda, you're welcome to chime in if you want, but my experience has been there are some states that actually um, want her to view it, but every state's a little different. In my experience, most birth mothers do not want to read that home study. They'd rather talk with you personally or read your adoption profile, which is a lot more relevant to what your everyday life is like rather than your extensive family history and um, all these little details that come into your home study. But Linda, in your experience, have you ever truly had a mother who wanted to choose adoption that just really, really needed the peace of mind of reading that home study? Has that come into play very much for you?
I've had a number of birth moms ask to read can I read the home study? And usually when you talk to them about what's in the home study and you tell them more, then they're comfortable. They're okay. Once you tell them what the process is, what the family has to go through, and then you give information about that family, then they're okay, and they love the profiles to look at when you're telling the story about the family. But there are some states that require that the birth mom read the home study. One of them is North Carolina, and it's not a bad thing. So you just be aware, and I didn't say that to scare you because it's not meant to. It's an okay thing if a birth mom wants to read a home study. I find it comforting when a birth mom asks that, actually, because it
Yeah,
tells
it
me
shows a
that
lot
she's
of thought.
really trying to make an informed decision about the most precious thing that she's giving up. And,
Yes.
um, so good for her. And
Mm-hmm.
I also, I would love to share a home study with a birth mom, but most of the time once you talk to them about it, you, I can only think of one time that I actually shared a home study with a birth mom. So
Yeah.
usually they're okay with what you're telling them.
Right. And getting to know you personally. I mean, that's such a benefit these days is her ability to get her own impression, not just the impression of social workers and doctors that have come into contact with you, um, but really getting to know you personally and building that trust with you one-on-one, I think is going to make a far bigger impression than if she read an extensive document about your life story. Um, So I'm glad we could talk about that. I know that it's very important to you that people also understand the health insurance uh, aspects of proving that you'll be able to insure your baby. Can you talk a little bit about when that comes into play? Because that's a pretty common question, and I know it's part of this checklist here, health and life insurance page showing coverage. But especially, people wonder, well, when should I prepare insurance for my future baby? But obviously it's coming into play well before they're matched. So could we talk a little bit? I made a note the other day from our conversation about how the attorney needs this verification immediately. Now, is that upon placement?
Yes. So a child can't be placed in your home, unless the home study is current and up to date, and that there's insurance for the baby. Sometimes it's Medicaid. Medicaid usually kicks in if the baby's in the hospital, but once the baby leaves the hospital and the birth mom signs consents, then it is your responsibility to make sure that the baby has medical coverage for medical attention. So what the home study provider wants to show, if you don't have children now, we just need to show that you have a policy and that on that policy you have the ability to add a child, an adopted child, to your policy at any given time during the policy period. Because we've had situations where, you can't add a child to a policy until the policy comes up for renewal again. And so we just want to make sure that that is not the case on the policy that you have now. So check with your provider and make sure that they know that your intention is to adopt and You don't know when it's going to be, so what is their policy? Because you want to be able to have coverage for that baby when that baby leaves the hospital.
Mhm. Which again is another reassurance to birth mothers as well. So it's not just a logistic element of adopting that child, but it's pretty common too. You know, you have to remember, as Linda so um, beautifully described, that choice that this birth mother is making is to allow you to be the mom and dad, and that a lot of times they will even ask how they can make sure that you are the ones responsible for that child, because they don't want to drop the ball somehow if there's something that they were supposed to be responsible for. And insurance is a question that I've been asked by some birth moms before. You know, when does mine kick over to theirs? And they just want to make sure that this baby is cared for. You know, has all the medical needs met too. So really great to talk about that. I know we're wrapping up our hour here. I just want to make sure I get through my list. I want, and maybe you can kind of tag on to this, Linda, I wish all adoptive parents could understand how much we at Lifetime and their home study provider appreciate timely, accurate documents submitted, completing the steps as required in a timely manner, because I have seen so many times when it just holds a family back from what could be a beautiful match for their adoption dream. So do you have any tips as we kind of wrap up today, you know, to maybe spur that person who's been putting off their home study, or maybe to just even pat someone on the back who's got it all checked off and they can just breathe a sigh of relief that they're good to go? What's your best recommendation as far as this very vital and necessary element of adopting?
Just do it. I mean, it is easy to procrastinate on getting some of the documents that are necessary, but it is so important to get it done quickly. You know, a home study sometimes could take 90 days, but much of the delay in the home study process is waiting for the paperwork to be completed. So, I mean, we try to say that we can get the home study done and the visit completed, or visits, within 30 days of receipt of all of the documents that are completed properly. So just make sure when you get your packet from your home study writer, look over the checklist of information that they need and just go down that list. You know, they'll tell you things that you need to obtain. One of the things, you know, go get your background clearances done. That can be a tedious task. If you have lived in another state, depending on how long you've lived in your current state, your home study writer may need for you to get local background clearances in another state. That's a tedious task. You know, just go down the list and get all of the things that you need to obtain, your physicals, all of that. Then you can fill out your adoptive home application and your parent questionnaire and all of that other stuff. But collect those documents first and get all the other documents completed. Make sure it's all, you know, submitted in good order, so that when the home study writer is, you know, gets it, they can just grab it and start running. And they can read your story and they can start, you know, planning how they're going to write your story and then visit you. So, and don't be intimidated by it, because it really isn't hard. It's just there's a lot, and it can be intimidating when you look at this big, long list of things that you need to do and this packet that looks like it's about 2 inches thick of things that you need to complete. But
Yeah.
it is intimidating, but really when you tackle it just a little bit of it at a time, you'll be surprised how quickly you can get it done.
That's what I've heard from people on the other side of adoption, is just to set a little goal. Maybe it's every night, maybe it's every week, to complete a chunk and just keep chunking away at it, and then pretty soon it's done. And some of you may have even seen recently on Lifetime's Facebook that we spoke with a couple birth mothers who are due really soon, but we couldn't present some families because their home study was not completed. And they were not families who just started up. They were families who have been essentially working and pursuing adoption for a little while, and it breaks our heart not to be able to present them when we know, you know, you would be great parents, but we need this element done, or else you're just simply not going to be able to bring this child into your home. This baby is not going to be placed in your home. Um, and now, Linda, I remember now what I wanted to ask. There was a really great question earlier that I was hoping you could clarify. What if, let's say, you're working with a family in Florida, but then they get chosen by a birth mother in a different state that might have slightly different requirements? Um, is of, I know that even this answer could vary, but what would you say to a question about, you know, what if this is not required in my state, but it's required where my baby's born? How do those things get worked out sort of at the last minute to help the placement move forward?
That's a really good question. The home study follows the state that you're in requirements. So if you're living in Florida, then your home study is written according to Florida law. If you live in Ohio, your home study is written according to Ohio law. Where the birth mother lives, as far as your home study goes, makes it, there's really no significance to that as far as your home study goes. So I can't even think of a reason why I would alter my home study for any other state. So it really doesn't. The only thing that I can think of is that sometimes if a birth mother's state is doing, if the adoption is finalizing in the birth mother's state, the only thing that would change is that the home study writer would have to abide by the number of post-placement visits that are required by that other state. So it wouldn't alter your home study. It would just, there may be a different number of visits that are required once the baby is placed in your home. For example, in Florida, it is required that you have a minimum of 3 visits monthly after the baby is placed in your home. Those are called post-placement visits. And they just changed the law that it could be monthly up to 6 months depending on when it finalizes, and after that quarterly. So some states only require 2 visits, and some states like Ohio require 6 visits. So it depends on the state. So whatever state is finalizing the adoption will dictate how many visits are required.
Thank you so much, Linda. I really appreciate you going into so much detail tonight to answer these really important questions about the important aspects and details that go into completing a qualified adoption home study. As most of you could probably hear through this call, it's just vital that you work with someone who is going to help you complete the adoption home study you need for the type of adoption you're pursuing, for adoption to qualify not only where you live, but also where your baby is born, and that it's just vitally important that you pay attention to the details involved in your home study so that you don't miss out on opportunities to adopt the baby that's meant for your family. So, Linda, thank you again for joining us and sharing your expertise and helping us to get that expert look behind the scenes of the adoption home study. I want to thank all of you for joining us and invite you to share your questions with us. If you are already working with Lifetime, certainly remember that your coordinator is here to help and that she wants to know where you're at with your home study, or if there's an important update that you're in the middle of making, or if you have a question about a detail that may affect your home study and your ability to move forward with an opportunity to match with a birth mother. If you're not working with Lifetime, we do invite you to share your questions with us. The home study process is one of the most often asked about topics and questions that we hear at Lifetime. And so we do understand and we want to be a help to you. If you're listening right now and you don't know who to talk to at Lifetime to get the answers you need regarding home study or just your adoption dream in general, we want you to reach out. Just call us 1-800-923-6784. Of course, you can also message us through our website, LifetimeAdoption.com. You can also, if it's easier for you, you can even message us on our social media on Facebook or Instagram. Just look for Lifetime Adoption Center. But of course, whenever you call us, we try and get you the information that you need for the adoption that you want to pursue, whether that means that we are just a stepping stone along your path or that we open up this path and walk alongside this journey with you. So I hope all of you had some great takeaways from this webinar about home studies and that we get to hear from you and find out how we can help. Thanks again, everyone. We'll talk with you soon. Bye-bye.